Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Hello, my name is Brian Ashford and I'm 27 years old. I currently live in Vermont, but I found your YouTube channel recently and decided to finally tell what happened to me when I worked in Washington State. This was 5 years ago, when I still worked as a forest ranger at Olympic National Park in Washington. What I'm going to tell you is the reason why I left that job, moved to Vermont, and could never go back to a forest alone again. I had been working there for 8 months when Alara Kestwick's case happened. What started as a routine search and rescue procedure turned into the worst nightmare of my life. To this day, 5 years later, here in Vermont, I still wake up in the middle of the night hearing those sounds. Sorry if my voice shakes at some moments. This is the first time I'm telling this completely to someone outside of therapy. My wife thinks I should keep this to myself, but you who follow real stories deserve to know that there are things out there. Things that people like me should protect you from, but sometimes we can't. I was new to the job, just 8 months, still trying to prove I deserved to be there. Olympic National Park isn't like these gentle Vermont forests where I live now. Out there in Washington, you have temperate rainforests so dense that noon feels like twilight. Trees so massive they've been standing since before Columbus. The Hoh rainforest, where this happened, gets over 140 inches of rain per year. Everything is perpetually damp, covered in moss, and sounds travel weird through all that vegetation. Alara Kestwick was a 24-year-old graduate student from the University of Washington. She was studying forest ecology, specifically old-growth fungi. Smart girl, experienced hiker, knew the risks. She had all the right permits, filed her research plan with us, carried proper equipment. Her advisor said she was meticulous about safety protocols. That's what made her disappearance so unsettling from the start. She was last seen on October 15th, 2019, at the Hoh River Trail parking area around 7 a.m. A couple of day hikers remembered seeing her because she had so much scientific equipment, sample containers, pH meters, a professional camera with macro lenses. She told them she was heading to a specific grove about 6 miles in, where some rare bracket fungi had been documented. When she didn't return by her scheduled check-in time 2 days later, her advisor called it in. I volunteered for the search team immediately. I knew that section of the park better than most of the other rangers, and honestly, I wanted to prove myself. 8 months in, I was still the rookie, still getting looks from the veterans when I spoke up in briefings. This felt like my chance to show I belonged. Our supervisor, Ranger Coleman, assigned me to work with Ranger Patricia Vega, a 15-year veteran who knew the Hoh system like her own backyard. We were tasked with following Alara's planned research route while other teams covered adjacent areas and possible deviation paths. The morning we started the search, October 18th, the fog was so thick you could barely see 20 feet ahead. That's normal for Olympic in autumn, but something felt different. Patricia mentioned it too as we geared up at the trailhead. "Air feels heavy today," she said, adjusting her radio. "More than usual." The Hoh River Trail starts easy enough, but once you get past the visitor area, it plunges into what feels like another world. Sitka spruces and western hemlocks rising 200 feet overhead, their trunks so wide that 3 people holding hands couldn't wrap around them. Everything draped in club moss and draped in silence, except for the distant sound of the river and your own footsteps on the spongy forest floor. We found Alara's first research site around mile marker 4. Her equipment was set up methodically. Sample containers arranged on a fallen log, notebook open to detailed sketches of bracket fungi, camera tripod still extended, but no Alara. "She was here recently," Patricia said, examining the setup. "Containers are clean, no rain damage on the notebook. This was maybe yesterday morning." I was checking the surrounding area when I found the first set of boot prints leading away from her station. They headed northwest, off the main trail, toward some of the densest sections of the forest. "Those aren't hiking boots," Patricia observed, crouching next to the prints. "Too heavy. Work boots, maybe military style." That should have been our first real warning. We radioed in our findings and received permission to follow the trail. Patricia had her GPS unit. I had backup navigation. We both carried emergency beacons. Standard protocol for off-trail search operations. The tracks led us deeper into old growth where the canopy was so thick that afternoon felt like dusk. Everything was moss and shadow and the peculiar green-tinted light that filters through a temperate rainforest. The air smelled like decomposition and earth and something else I couldn't identify. Something sweet and sickening. About a mile off the main trail, we found more of Alara's equipment. This time it was scattered. Sample containers broken, notebooks torn, camera equipment smashed against a tree trunk. "This doesn't look accidental," Patricia said, her voice tense. "Someone did this deliberately." That's when we heard the first voice. It was a child's voice, very faint, calling help me from somewhere ahead of us in the forest. Both Patricia and I froze, listening. The voice came again, clearer this time. Definitely a young child, maybe 6 or 7 years old. "There's no children reported missing in this area," Patricia whispered. "Could be someone camping illegally with kids," I suggested. But even as I said it, something felt wrong. The voice had an odd quality to it, like an echo that arrived before the original sound. We followed the voice deeper into the forest. Our radio started crackling with static, then went completely dead. Patricia tried her cell phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual in the dense forest, but the timing felt ominous. The child's voice kept calling, always just ahead of us, always just out of sight. "Help me, please, I'm scared." Sometimes it seemed to come from our left, sometimes our right, sometimes from directly above us in the canopy. That's when Patricia stopped walking. "Brian," she said quietly, "I've been doing this for 15 years. I know every family that camps in this park, every local who brings kids hiking. There are no children in this section today." As if responding to her words, the voice called again, but this time it was different. It was still a child's voice, but it was saying my name. "Brian, Brian, help me." I felt ice water run down my spine. There was no way a lost child would know my name. Patricia grabbed my arm. "We're leaving. Now." But when we turned around, the trail we'd been following was gone. Not overgrown, not hard to see. Completely gone. Where there had been a clear path through the underbrush 5 minutes earlier, there was now virgin forest. Moss-covered logs and ferns, as if no human had ever walked there. Patricia's hands were shaking as she checked her GPS unit. The screen was showing our location as somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. "This is impossible," she whispered. "This equipment doesn't malfunction like this." The child's voice called again, but now it was coming from multiple directions at once. Different children's voices, all calling our names, all pleading for help. The sound seemed to surround us, echo through the trees, bounce off the moss-covered ground. And that's when we saw him. He was about 50 yards away, partially hidden behind one of the massive Sitka spruces. A tall man, maybe 6'2", wearing military-style camouflage that blended perfectly with the forest shadows. He was watching us through binoculars. Patricia saw him too. She reached for her radio, forgetting it was dead, then went for her emergency beacon. The man stepped out from behind the tree and I could see he was smiling. "Rangers," he called out, his voice carrying easily through the still air. "Looking for someone?" Something about his tone made my skin crawl. Too casual, too friendly for the circumstances. "Sir, you need to identify yourself," Patricia called back, her hand moving to her sidearm. "This is a restricted search area." The man started walking toward us, moving with the kind of easy confidence that comes from military training. As he got closer, I could see he was probably in his 40s. Weathered face, gray-streaked beard, eyes that seemed to take in everything and give away nothing. "Name's Kane Holbrook," he said, stopping about 20 feet away. "I've been tracking your missing girl." "You've seen Alara Kestwick?" I asked. His smile widened. "Oh, I've seen her. Question is, are you prepared to see what's left of her?" Patricia's weapon was halfway out of its holster when the temperature dropped. I don't mean it got chilly. I mean, the temperature plummeted at least 30 degrees in the span of about 5 seconds. Our breath started fogging. Frost began forming on the nearby ferns, and I could feel the cold seeping through my jacket like it was made of paper. Holbrook noticed it too, but instead of looking concerned, he looked pleased. "They don't like visitors," he said conversationally. "Been trying to tell people that for years, but nobody listens." The children's voices started up again, but now they were screaming, not calling for help, screaming in terror, in pain, in desperation. The sound was coming from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through the trees, seeming to originate from the moss itself. Patricia drew her weapon completely. "Sir, I need you to step back and place your hands where I can see them." Holbrook laughed. "Ranger, you're about to learn that there are things in these woods that don't care about your authority. Things that have been here a lot longer than the Park Service." That's when I saw the first shadow. It was moving between the trees, roughly human-shaped but wrong somehow. Too tall, arms too long, moving in a way that didn't match the rhythm of walking. As I watched, more shadows began moving in my peripheral vision. "Patricia," I said quietly, "we need to leave, now." But when I looked around, Patricia was gone. I was standing alone in the forest with Kane Holbrook, surrounded by moving shadows and the sound of screaming children, and my partner of 15 years' experience had simply vanished. "Where is she?" I demanded, raising my own sidearm. Holbrook shrugged. "Same place your missing girl is, same place you're going." The shadows were getting closer. I could hear Patricia's voice now calling my name, but it was coming from above me, from the canopy, impossible high up in the trees. Brian, help me, I can't get down." I looked up and saw nothing but moss-draped branches and gray sky filtered through the canopy. But Patricia's voice kept calling, getting more desperate, more panicked. Holbrook was watching me with obvious amusement. "You want to know what I figured out, rookie? About this place? About why some people go missing and never get found?" The shadows had formed a rough circle around us. They weren't quite solid. I could see the forest through them. But they were definitely there, definitely moving, definitely focused on me. "This forest feeds on fear," Holbrook continued. "The more scared someone gets, the more real the shadows become. The more the voices sound like people you know. The more the forest itself seems to turn against you." Patricia's voice was getting fainter, more distant. "Brian, please, I'm falling, I can't hold on." "And I figured out how to use that," Holbrook said. "How to make the forest work for me instead of against me. You bring someone out here, get them good and scared, and the forest does most of the work." I tried to back away from him, but the shadows shifted to block my path. Everywhere I turned, they were there, human-shaped but wrong, reaching toward me with arms that were too long, fingers that bent the wrong way. "Your partner found out about me 6 months ago," Holbrook said. "Found one of my kill sites, started asking questions. That's why she's really here today, Brian. Not to find your missing girl. To find evidence of what I've been doing." The children's voices had stopped screaming and started laughing, high, echoing laughter that seemed to come from the trees themselves. And underneath it, I could still hear Patricia calling for help, her voice getting weaker and more distant. "The thing about Patricia," Holbrook continued, "is she's got 15 years of experience. Knows how to stay calm, how to think through a crisis. That's why it took the forest longer to get to her." He looked at me with something like pity. "But you're new. 8 months, right? Still trying to prove yourself. Still scared you don't belong here. The forest can smell that on you." The shadows were close enough now that I could feel cold radiating from them. My breath was fogging with each exhale, and frost was forming on the barrel of my sidearm. The missing girl, Alara, she lasted 3 days. Smart, experienced, knew the woods, but she was alone, and I made sure she got scared fast. The forest took care of the rest. "Where is she?" I managed to ask through chattering teeth. Holbrook pointed deeper into the forest, toward a section so dark and overgrown it looked like a tunnel through the vegetation. "Same place Patricia is now, same place you're going. There's a place in there where the shadows get solid, where the voices become real, where the forest shows you exactly what it's hungry for." I tried to run, turned and sprinted toward where I thought the trail should be, crashing through ferns and moss, stumbling over fallen logs, branches tearing at my jacket and face. But the forest had changed again. Trees that had been widely spaced were now growing close together, forming impassable walls of bark and moss. Trails that should have led back toward the river were leading deeper into darkness. The GPS unit on my belt was spinning wildly, showing my location jumping between impossible coordinates. Behind me, Holbrook was following at a casual walking pace, whistling some tune I couldn't identify. The shadows moved with him, flowing between the trees like smoke given form, and Patricia's voice kept calling from above, getting weaker and more desperate. I ended up in a small clearing where the canopy opened just enough to let in some gray afternoon light. In the center of the clearing was a circle of standing stones that definitely hadn't been there in any park survey I'd studied. The stones were covered in moss, but I could see markings carved into them, symbols that hurt to look at directly. Around the base of the stones were bones, animal bones mostly, but some that were clearly human. Fresh bones and old bones, some so ancient they were more fossil than bone. And scattered among them, pieces of clothing, equipment, personal belongings. I recognized Alara's camera among the debris. The LCD screen was cracked, but it was still functional. I picked it up and scrolled through the photos. The last several images showed the clearing where I was standing. But in Alara's photos, the shadows were solid. Dark figures with human shapes but wrong proportions, reaching toward the camera with fingers like twisted branches. And in the background of the photos, barely visible in the tree line, was Kane Holbrook, watching. "She put up a good fight," Holbrook said, entering the clearing behind me. But the forest was hungry and she was alone and scared. The shadows were gathering around the stone circle now, becoming more solid, more defined. I could see faces in them, or what might have been faces, hollow eyes, mouths open in silent screams, expressions of terror and desperation. Patricia figured out what I was doing, Holbrook continued. Found 3 of my kill sites, started putting together a pattern. That's why she volunteered for this search. She knew I'd be here. "Where is she?" I demanded again. Holbrook nodded toward the trees on the far side of the clearing. Following his gaze, I saw Patricia hanging from one of the massive Sitka spruces, about 40 feet up, suspended in a web of rope and moss. She was unconscious but breathing. "The forest likes to save some for later," Holbrook explained. "Let them hang there for a few days, getting weaker, getting more scared, makes the feeding better." The shadows were solid now, no longer translucent. I could hear them breathing, could smell the odor of decay and wet earth that clung to them. They were closing in on the stone circle, and I was trapped in the center. "Your turn, rookie," Holbrook said, pulling out a hunting knife with a blade that looked like it had seen recent use. "Let's see how long you last." That's when the emergency beacon in my pack started working, not the beacon itself. That had been dead for hours. But something else, some other signal, was coming through my radio in bursts of static and electronic noise. And buried in the static, I could hear voices, human voices calling coordinates, organizing search patterns. "Brian, Patricia, come in. This is base camp. We have teams converging on your last known position." Holbrook heard it too. His confident expression faltered for the first time. "That's impossible," he said. "No signals get through here." I made sure of that. The shadows hesitated, their forms becoming less solid, more translucent. The children's voices that had been echoing through the trees went quiet. "Brian, Patricia, if you can hear this, we're tracking your emergency beacons. Help is coming." I looked at my beacon. It was still showing as non-functional, but somehow, impossibly, it was transmitting. Holbrook snarled and lunged at me with the knife. I managed to dodge, slipping on the moss-covered ground, rolling away from the stone circle. The shadows reached for me, but their fingers passed through my jacket like smoke. The radio kept crackling with voices, coordinates, search patterns, and the more it crackled, the less solid the shadows became. The quieter the forest grew, the more normal the temperature felt. Holbrook was fighting to reach me, but something was holding him back. The shadows that had been helping him were now clinging to him, wrapping around his arms and legs like restraints. "This isn't over," he shouted as the shadows pulled him toward the tree line. "The forest remembers. It knows you now. It'll call you back. The last thing I saw of him was his face disappearing into the mass of shadows at the edge of the clearing, his eyes still fixed on me with a mixture of rage and promise. The rescue team found me 20 minutes later. I was unconscious in the stone circle, suffering from hypothermia and exhaustion. They said my beacon had suddenly started transmitting a strong signal after hours of nothing. They found Patricia too. She was hanging unconscious in the tree, exactly where I'd seen her, secured with military-grade rope and climbing equipment. She had no memory of how she got there or what had happened after we'd started following the child's voice. They never found Ilara Kestwick. The clearing with the stone circle couldn't be located again, despite GPS coordinates and detailed descriptions. Search teams combed that section of forest for weeks and found nothing but virgin wilderness. They never found Kane Holbrook either. No record of anyone by that name having permits to be in the park. No military records, no address, no evidence he ever existed except for Patricia's climbing rope and some boot prints that led to nowhere. The official report listed Ilara as missing, presumed dead due to exposure or accident. Patricia was treated for hypothermia and released. I was put on medical leave for psychological evaluation. I never went back to work. The nightmares started immediately. Every night I'd dream about the stone circle, about the shadows reaching for me, about Holbrook's promise that the forest would call me back. I'd wake up hearing children's voices calling my name, feeling the supernatural cold seeping through my bedroom walls. But the worst part was the certainty that it wasn't over. Patricia felt it too. We talked a few times after the incident, before I moved to Vermont. She said she could sense something following her, watching her. She'd be hiking familiar trails and suddenly find herself somewhere she'd never been before, with no memory of how she got there. 3 months after the incident, she transferred to a desk job in Seattle. She said she couldn't trust the forest anymore. I moved to Vermont because I thought distance would help. 3,000 miles away from Olympic National Park, in gentle hardwood forests that bear no resemblance to the temperate rainforests of Washington. No moss-draped giants, no perpetual twilight, no shadows that move independently of their sources. But distance doesn't matter. Last month I was hiking a familiar trail near my house in Vermont, a trail I've walked dozens of times in broad daylight with my wife, when I heard a child's voice calling my name from the trees. Brian. Brian, help me. I ran. Left my wife confused and concerned, sprinted back to the trailhead, drove home with shaking hands. When I tried to explain what had happened, I couldn't find the words. That's when I knew I had to tell someone. Had to get this story out there because whatever happened in Olympic National Park 5 years ago, it's not finished with me. I still don't know what Kane Holbrook was. Human predator using the forest's natural eeriness to hunt people? Something else entirely. Something that fed on fear and isolation? The more I think about it, the less certain I become about what was real and what was the forest playing with my mind. But I know what I experienced. I know Patricia experienced something similar. I know Ilara Kestwick is still out there somewhere, in that place where the shadows get solid and the voices become real. And I know that whatever it was, it's still looking for me. So if you're planning to visit Olympic National Park, especially the Hoh Rainforest, please be careful. Stay on marked trails. Travel in groups. Trust your equipment, but don't trust your senses if things start feeling wrong. And if you hear children calling for help from deep in the forest, don't follow the voices. Some things in the wilderness are exactly what they seem to be. Natural, explicable, manageable with proper training and equipment. But some things are older than the Park Service, hungrier than any natural predator, and patient enough to wait years for the right opportunity to finish what they started. I thought moving to Vermont would save me from whatever I encountered in Washington. These New England forests are different, smaller trees, familiar wildlife, no moss-draped giants or supernatural cold pockets. But last week, I found boot prints outside my house. Heavy boots, military style, leading from the tree line to my front door and then disappearing. The same pattern I saw 5 years ago in Olympic National Park. Whatever Kane Holbrook was, whatever the forest showed me in that stone circle, it's found me here in Vermont. 3,000 miles wasn't far enough. I don't know if telling this story will help or make things worse, but if something happens to me, if I disappear like Alara did, at least someone will know what to look for. And maybe, if you're ever hiking alone and you hear a voice calling your name from deep in the trees, you'll remember this story and turn around. Because the forest is always hungry, and it never forgets. Hello, my name is Garrett Holstead and I'm 31 years old. I currently live in Arizona, but I found your YouTube channel recently and decided to finally tell what happened to me when I worked in Washington. This was 5 years ago, when I still worked as a forest ranger at Olympic National Park in Washington State. What I'm going to tell you is the reason why I left that job, moved to Arizona, and could never go back to a forest alone again. I had been working there for 7 months when Eliza Vern's case happened. What started as a routine search and rescue procedure turned into the worst nightmare of my life. To this day, 5 years later, here in Arizona, I still wake up in the middle of the night hearing those sounds. Sorry if my voice shakes at some moments. This is the first time I'm telling this completely to someone outside of therapy. My wife thinks I should keep this to myself, but you who follow real stories deserve to know that there are things out there, things that people like me should protect you from. But sometimes we can't. I need to take a breath before I continue. Even here in the desert heat of Phoenix, thinking about those cold, wet forests makes my hands shake. The dry air here, the lack of trees pressing in on all sides. That's why I chose Arizona. As far from the Pacific Northwest as I could get while still staying in the country. Let me start from the beginning. I was new to the job, just 7 months in, still trying to prove I deserved to be there. Olympic National Park isn't like other parks. It's got temperate rainforest alpine areas and over 70 miles of wilderness coastline. In autumn, when this happened, the park transforms. By October, darkness comes at 5 p.m., the rain is constant, and the fog rolls in from the Pacific so thick you can't see 10 feet ahead. I was stationed at the Quinault Ranger Station in the southwest part of the park. The Quinault rainforest gets about 12 feet of rain a year. Yeah, you heard that right. Feet, not inches. In autumn, it's a maze of massive Sitka spruces and western hemlocks. Their branches so dense that even at noon it feels like twilight underneath. The moss hangs from everything like curtains, muffling sounds and making every tree look like every other tree. October 18th, 2019. I remember because it was my sister's birthday, and I'd been planning to call her after my shift. The call came in around 3 p.m. A solo hiker hadn't checked in. Eliza Vern, 26 years old, nature photographer from Seattle. She'd registered for a 3-day backcountry permit in the Enchanted Valley area, was supposed to be back that morning. Her car was still at the Graves Creek trailhead. I volunteered immediately. Like I said, I was eager to prove myself, and search and rescue was exactly the kind of thing I wanted on my record. My supervisor, Ranger Catherine Morse, paired me with Marcus Reeds, a veteran with 15 years under his belt. Marcus was in his 40s, quiet guy, knew every trail in the park like the back of his hand. He had this habit of stopping mid-stride and cocking his head, listening to the forest like it was talking to him. We geared up fast. Radios, GPS units, first aid kits, emergency shelter, food for 3 days. The Enchanted Valley Trail is 13 miles one way, and with someone potentially injured or lost, we needed to move quick but be prepared for anything. The weather report showed a storm system moving in from the Pacific. In Washington autumn, that meant we had maybe 12 hours before conditions would force us to suspend the search. The trailhead was already dim when we started at 4 p.m. The Sitka spruces towered above us, some over 200 feet tall, their trunks 20 feet in diameter. In Arizona, you can see for miles. In the Olympic rainforest, you can barely see the sky. The trail followed the Quinault River, but you could only hear it. The undergrowth was too thick to see water. Marcus set a fast pace. I was in good shape, but keeping up while scanning for any sign of Eliza was taxing. We called her name every few minutes, our voices swallowed by the moss and ferns. The only responses were the occasional calls of varied thrushes, these haunting, single-note whistles that echo through the forest. About 3 miles in, we found our first sign, a lens cap from a camera, just off the trail near a massive nurse log. That's what we call fallen trees that become ecosystems of their own. I bagged it, marked the GPS coordinates. Marcus studied the ground with his flashlight. She left the trail here, he said, pointing to barely visible impressions in the moss. Probably saw something she wanted to photograph. This was concerning, but not unusual. Nature photographers often venture off trail for the perfect shot, despite our warnings. We followed the faint trail through Devil's Club, nasty stuff with thorns that break off in your skin, and salal bushes. The forest floor here was spongy, built up from centuries of fallen trees and decomposing matter. In some places, you could push a walking stick down 3 feet and not hit solid ground. That's when we heard it. A voice calling for help. Female, distant, maybe a quarter-mile northeast. We both froze, listening. In the rainforest, sound does weird things. The moss absorbs some frequencies while the tree trunks create echoes. It can make a sound seem like it's coming from completely the wrong direction. "Eliza," I called out, cupping my hands around my mouth. "This is Olympic Search and Rescue. Stay where you are." The voice came again, clearer this time. "Help me, please, I'm hurt." We crashed through the undergrowth, following the voice. Marcus was on his radio, updating dispatch on our position. The canopy was so thick here that the GPS struggled to get a satellite fix. We were relying on compass bearings and Marcus's knowledge of the terrain. 20 minutes of hard bushwhacking later, we emerged into a small clearing. Our flashlights swept the area, nothing but more trees and a carpet of moss. The voice had stopped. "Eliza," I called again. This time, the response came from behind us, back the way we'd come. "Help me." Marcus grabbed my arm as I turned. "Wait." "What do you mean, wait? She's..." "Listen to the voice," he said quietly. I did. The plea came again, and this time I noticed what Marcus had. It was the exact same inflection, the exact same timing, like a recording being played back. "Help me, please, I'm hurt." Word for word, tone for tone. My skin prickled despite the Gore-Tex jacket. "Maybe she's delirious? Hypothermia can..." "Maybe," Marcus said, but he didn't sound convinced. He tried his radio. Static. The signal, which had been weak but present, was now completely dead. We made our way back toward the trail, following our GPS track. The voice continued to call, sometimes from our left, sometimes from our right, always the same words in the same desperate tone. It was 6 p.m. now, full dark under the canopy. Our flashlights created a tunnel of light through the green darkness. Then we saw the light. About 50 yards through the trees, a camping lantern glowed. Not moving, just sitting there like someone had set up camp, which made no sense. This area was off trail, not a designated camping spot, and Eliza hadn't registered for overnight camping anyway. We approached cautiously. The light sat in the middle of another small clearing, one of those Coleman lanterns hissing away. Next to it was a blue backpack, women's model. A camera bag lay open beside it, expensive equipment visible inside. "Don't touch anything," Marcus said, though I wasn't planning to. Something about the scene felt staged, too neat, too deliberate. That's when we heard the crying. Not a woman this time, a child. The sound drifted through the trees, high-pitched sobs that made my chest tighten. No kid should be out here, especially not in these conditions. "There are no children registered for this trail," Marcus said, voicing my thought. "No families at all today." The crying intensified, became screaming. The kind of terrified shrieks that trigger every protective instinct. I took a step toward the sound before Marcus grabbed me again. "Think," he said. "How did a child get here? Why haven't we heard them until now?" He was right. We'd been making noise for hours, calling Eliza's name. Any kid lost out here would have heard us, come toward us. Unless they couldn't. Unless they were hurt, or... The screaming stopped mid-shriek, cut off like someone hitting pause on a recording. The silence that followed was worse than the crying. Even the usual forest sounds, The drip of water from branches, the rustle of small animals had stopped. It was like the entire rainforest was holding its breath. Marcus clicked his radio again. Still static, but underneath it, I could swear I heard something else. Whispers. Multiple voices, too faint to make out words. "We need to get back to the trail," he said. "Now." But when we turned, our flashlights illuminated something that made us both freeze. Footprints in the moss, fresh ones circling the camp. They hadn't been there minutes ago. I would have seen them. I'd been scanning the ground constantly, training kicking in. The prints were barefoot. In October. In the Olympic rainforest. "Marcus," I whispered. "I see them." We stood back to back, flashlights sweeping the tree line. Nothing moved in the beams, but I had the overwhelming sensation of being watched. Not just watched, studied. Like something was learning our patterns, our reactions. A branch snapped to our left. We spun, lights converging on the spot. Nothing there but trees and shadows. Another snap, this time from the right, then behind us. The sounds were deliberate, timed, circling. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is the National Park Service. Identify yourself." The response wasn't words. It was laughter. Low, masculine laughter that seemed to come from the trees themselves, not echoing like normal sound, but present everywhere at once. Marcus pulled out his bear spray. I did the same, though we both knew this wasn't a wildlife situation. Bears don't laugh. Bears don't leave barefoot prints. Bears don't set up staged camps with Coleman lanterns. The laughter faded, replaced by something worse. My own voice playing back from the darkness. "Who's there? This is the National Park Service. Identify yourself." Exact same tone, same slight crack on the word yourself where my fear had broken through. Then Marcus's voice. "We need to get back to the trail. Now." But Marcus hadn't spoken. He was right beside me, jaw clenched, saying nothing. The voices continued, playing back our entire conversation from the last 10 minutes. When they reached the part about the footprints, new ones appeared in the moss right in front of us. We watched them form, depressions appearing one by one, tracing a path that circled us again, closer this time. "Run," Marcus said. We ran, crashing through the undergrowth, branches tearing at our jackets. We fled toward what we hoped was the trail. Behind us, the voices continued. Mine, Marcus's, and now others. Eliza's voice calling for help. The child crying. And underneath it all, that low laughter. My flashlight beam caught something white ahead. A trail marker. We'd made it back to the main path. But as we burst onto the trail, we nearly collided with someone standing in the middle of it. A man. Tall, probably 6'4", wearing old military surplus gear. His feet were bare, caked in mud. His hair was long, matted, gray-streaked. But it was his eyes that made me take an involuntary step back. They reflected our lights like an animal's, and there was something wrong with how he stood. Too still, like he was posing for a picture we couldn't see. "Evening, Rangers," he said. His voice was cultured, educated, completely at odds with his wild appearance. "Lose someone?" Marcus had his bear spray raised. "Sir, I need you to identify yourself. What are you doing out here?" The man tilted his head, considering. "I live here. Have for, 7 years now. Maybe 8. Time's different in the deep woods." He smiled, revealing teeth that were surprisingly white and straight. "You can call me Silas. You're camping illegally," I said, finding my voice. "This is federal land. You need permits." "Permits." He laughed, that same low rumble we'd heard in the forest. "I was in Afghanistan, Iraq too. Uncle Sam sent me to live in places that wanted me dead. Figured he owed me some peace when I got back, so I took it." "Sir, we're looking for a missing hiker," Marcus said, not lowering the bear spray. "Eliza Verney. Have you seen her?" Silas's smile widened. "Pretty thing. Camera around her neck. She wanted to photograph the old growth, the untouched places." He gestured vaguely into the forest. "I showed her some. Special spots. Places where the old forest remembers." Where is she? I demanded. Oh, she's around. They're all around if you know how to listen. He cocked his head, mimicking Marcus's earlier gesture. Can't you hear them? And God help me, I could. Whispers in the trees, just at the edge of perception. Not wind through branches, but voices. Dozens of them. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus said steadily. You're going to take us to Eliza, right now. Then you're coming back with us. Silas laughed again. I don't think so, Ranger Reeds. Marcus stiffened. He hadn't given his name. Oh, I know all about you, Silas continued. 15 years of service. Wife Linda, daughter in college. Western Washington University, isn't it? Environmental science major, following in Daddy's footsteps. How? I told you. I live here. I watch. I listen. Amazing what people say on their radios thinking they're alone in the woods. His eyes shifted to me. And you, Garrett. Still trying to fill your father's shoes? Tough act to follow. A man who died in the line of duty. Phoenix Fire Department, wasn't it? Hero's funeral and everything. My blood went cold. That information wasn't in any file the Park Service had. I'd never told anyone here about my dad. The forest tells me things, Silas said, as if reading my mind. It's been telling me things for years. Showed me the thin places where the walls are weak, where things can cross over, where time bends. He took a step toward us. Marcus and I backed up instinctively. Want to know a secret? He stage whispered. This place has been collecting people long before I got here. I just figured out how to use what was already happening. The Park Service, they know. Why do you think they pair rookies with veterans? Why do you think Marcus here knows to listen before he moves? That's enough, Marcus said. You're under arrest for... The lights went out, both our flashlights, simultaneously. In the absolute darkness that followed, I heard Silas's voice, but it seemed to come from multiple directions at once. The Maka tribe used to avoid this part of the forest, called it the place where stories end. They knew what I learned. Some places are hungry. They take people, keep them, replay them like echoes. My flashlight flickered back on, beam weak and yellow. Marcus's did the same. Silas was gone. No sound of footsteps, no rustle of bushes. Just gone. Back to the station, Marcus said. Now, we need backup. We moved fast down the trail, but it was wrong. I'd hiked this path earlier, memorized the landmarks. They were out of order. A distinctive nurse log that should have been at mile 2 appeared at what should have been mile 4. The river sounds came from the wrong side. Marcus, I started, I know, keep moving. Our radios crackled to life. Dispatch, finally, but the voice was wrong. Too deep, distorted. Rangers, please respond. We have reports of screaming from your area. Marcus grabbed his radio. This is Reeds. We need immediate backup at... The voice cut him off. Rangers, please respond. We have reports of screaming from your area. Same exact words. Same inflection. It's a recording, I said. He's playing recordings. But Marcus was looking at his GPS unit, face pale in the flashlight beam. Garrett, look at the time. I checked my watch. 11:47 p.m. We'd been in the forest for nearly 8 hours. It felt like 2 at most. That's not possible, I said. Rangers, please respond. We have reports of screaming from your area. We kept moving, and then I saw them. Lights ahead, moving through the trees, parallel to the trail. Flashlights. Multiple beams sweeping back and forth in search patterns. Thank God, I breathed. Back up. But Marcus grabbed my arm. Look closer. I did. The lights moved in perfect synchronization. When one swept left, they all swept left. Same angle, same speed. Like puppets on the same string. And between the trees, I could see the figures holding them. They wore ranger uniforms, but they moved wrong. Jerky, unnatural gaits, heads turning too far on necks, arms bending at angles that made my stomach turn. Don't look at them, Marcus whispered. Don't acknowledge them. Just walk. We passed the lights, keeping our eyes fixed ahead. I could feel them watching us, those things wearing ranger uniforms. In my peripheral vision, I saw one's head turn completely backward to track our movement. The trail began to look familiar again. The landmarks were in the right order. We were maybe a mile from the trailhead when we heard her. Eliza Verne calling from just off the trail. "Hello? Is someone there? Please, I've been lost for hours." We stopped. This voice was different, not the repetitive recording from earlier. It had variation, emotion, the sound of real fear and exhaustion. "Please," she called again. "I can see your lights. I'm injured." I looked at Marcus. He was torn. I could see it. Everything said this was another trick, but what if it wasn't? What if she was really out there? "Eliza," he called out. "If that's you, tell me something that's not in your registration, something only you would know." Silence. Then, "What?" My ankle's broken, I think. Please, I need help." "Tell me the name of your first pet," Marcus insisted. "Or your mother's maiden name. Anything." The silence stretched longer this time. When the voice came again, it was different. Colder. "Help me. Please, I'm hurt." The exact words from hours ago. The recording again. We ran the last mile. The parking lot was a shock of normalcy. Our patrol truck sat where we'd left it, handful of other vehicles scattered around. The trailhead register stood in its little wooden shelter, ordinary and solid. Marcus immediately tried his radio. This time it worked. Clear signal connecting us to dispatch. He called in everything: the illegal camper, the false signals, requesting immediate backup and a full search team for First Light. While he talked, I noticed something that made my skin crawl all over again. Eliza's car, the white Subaru Outback that had triggered this whole search. The windows were fogged from the inside, and in the condensation on the rear window, someone had drawn words with their finger. "They're still playing." Marcus finished his call and saw what I was looking at. We approached the vehicle carefully, bear spray ready. The doors were locked. We shined our lights through the windows and I nearly vomited. The interior was covered in photographs, hundreds of them taped to every surface, all showing the same thing: rangers searching the forest. Different uniforms from different eras. Some looked decades old. All searching, calling out, looking for someone who was never found. And in the center of the dashboard, a newer digital camera, Eliza's based on the distinctive strap. The screen was on, showing the last photo taken. It was us, Marcus and me at the first stage campsite, taken from maybe 20 feet away. We'd never seen anyone, never heard a shutter click, but the timestamp was wrong. According to the camera, the photo was taken tomorrow. October 19th, 2019, 3:17 a.m. I checked my watch. 1:04 a.m. October 19th. Marcus. That's when the screaming started. Not from the forest this time, from the other cars in the parking lot. Multiple voices all crying for help, all pounding on windows from inside vehicles that looked empty. We backed toward our truck, but the screaming followed. Our own voices joined the chorus, recordings of our calls for Eliza, our conversation with Silas, our fear and confusion. The parking lot lights flickered, dimmed, went out. In the darkness, I heard footsteps on gravel, bare feet, moving between the cars. "They want to add you to the collection." Silas's voice drifted through the dark. "The forest has been taking people for decades. Hikers, hunters, rangers, keeping them, replaying them, using their voices to lure more. I just learned how to direct it." Marcus got the truck started, headlights blazing to life. Silas stood directly in front of us, no longer looking human. His shape flickered, shifted, like looking at him through water. Behind him, other figures emerged from between the cars, some in modern hiking gear, some in ranger uniforms from the 1970s, some in clothes I couldn't place, older, much older. All of them moved wrong. All of them opened their mouths in unison, and Eliza's voice came out. "Help me. Please. I'm hurt." Marcus threw the truck in reverse, tires spinning on the wet gravel. As we backed up, I saw something that still shows up in my nightmares. The figures weren't casting shadows. The headlights passed right through some of them, but Silas was solid enough. He walked after us, unhurried, smiling. "You can leave," he called out, "but you'll come back. They always come back. The forest calls them home." We made it out, drove too fast down the winding forest road, skidding on wet leaves. Neither of us spoke until we hit Highway 101, until we could see the lights of Amanda Park. The official search began at dawn. 20 rangers, local search and rescue, state police. They found Eliza Verne's body 3 days later, 2 miles from where we'd encountered Silas. She'd been dead for at least a week before we'd even started looking. The coroner couldn't explain the preservation of the body. It should have shown much more decomposition in the wet environment. They never found Silas. Never found evidence of a camp, illegal or otherwise. The photographs in Eliza's car were gone when investigators returned to process it. The camera showed no photos after October 11th, a week before she was reported missing. But other things were found, records going back decades of similar disappearances. Search teams reporting voices calling for help that led nowhere. Rangers leaving the service abruptly, moving across the country, refusing to explain why. I lasted 2 more weeks. The final straw came when I was alone at the station, filing paperwork from the search. The radio crackled to life. My own voice recorded from that night calling for Eliza. Then Marcus responding. Then Silas laughing. I submitted my resignation the next day, packed everything I owned into my truck and drove south. Didn't stop until I hit Phoenix. The desert seemed like the opposite of those dark, wet forests. Safe. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I hear them. Whispers carried on the wind, voices calling for help, and I know Silas was right about one thing. Part of me wants to go back. The forest does call. It knows my name. Marcus still works there. We email sometimes, carefully avoiding certain topics. He mentioned last year that they've implemented new protocols, teams of 3 minimum for backcountry searches, mandatory GPS check-ins every hour, no off-trail pursuit of voice contacts without visual confirmation. They know. The Park Service knows something's wrong in those woods, but what can they do? Close 1,400 square miles of wilderness because sometimes people disappear? Because sometimes the forest keeps them? I work retail now. REI, actually. Guess I couldn't completely leave the outdoor world behind. When customers ask for recommendations about Olympic National Park, I tell them it's beautiful. I tell them to stick to the popular trails, stay in groups, get out before dark. I don't tell them about the thin places Silas mentioned. I don't tell them that on some nights in some parts of that ancient forest time works differently. That there are spots where every person who's ever gone missing is still there, still calling for help, still being used as bait for the next one. Last month I got a package, no return address. Inside was a photo printed on regular paper. Me, at my apartment in Phoenix, taken through my living room window. In the reflection on the glass, barely visible, stands a tall figure in military surplus gear. I'm moving again. Further this time. Maybe overseas. Somewhere with no forests, no places for things to hide and wait and remember. But I know the truth now. It doesn't matter how far I run. When he said we always come back, he meant it. Either in body or in spirit. We return to the places that marked us. And someday, when I'm old or weak or just tired of running, I'll hear those voices calling one more time, and I'll answer. That's my story. I've been in therapy for 5 years now, and my therapist says telling it might help. I don't know if it has. But maybe if someone else hears this, if another ranger recognizes the signs, they'll know to get out, to run, to not look back. Don't go looking for the places I've described. Don't try to find Silas or the spots where time bends. Some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved. Some places are meant to stay lost. And if you ever hear voices in the forest calling for help, especially if they sound too perfect, too repetitive, don't follow them. Just get out. Get to your car, get to civilization, and don't stop moving until you can't hear them anymore. Because the Olympic forest remembers everyone who enters it. And sometimes, it decides to keep them. Thank you for listening. Stay safe out there. The radio crackled to life at 4:47 a.m., pulling me from the restless sleep that had become my constant companion since joining the Olympic National Park Ranger Service 6 months ago. Static filled my small cabin before Chief Ranger Morrison's gravelly voice cut through the white noise. "Thorne, we've got a situation. Missing person report came in an hour ago. College kid last seen 3 days ago near the Hoh River Trail system." I fumbled for my radio in the darkness, my heart already picking up pace. This was it, my first real missing person case. After months of routine patrols, campfire violations, and lost day hikers who wandered 50 yards off marked trails, finally something that mattered. Something that could prove I belonged here. Copy, Chief. Details? Dahlia Voss, 19, University of Washington student. Photography major doing some kind of project on old-growth forests. Her roommate says she was supposed to check in yesterday morning, never did. I was already pulling on my uniform, mind racing through search protocols I'd memorized but never implemented. The Hoh River system sprawled across nearly 40 square miles of dense temperate rainforest, some of the most unforgiving terrain in the Pacific Northwest. If she was hurt, injured, or worse. Her vehicle? Found it yesterday evening in the Hoh River parking area. Overnight camping permit for 3 days, expired as of midnight. Park maintenance found her car this morning when they did their sweep. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Someone's daughter was out there, and I was the one being trusted to bring her home. After 6 months of senior rangers treating me like an overeager kid who'd watched too many movies about wilderness rescue, this was my chance to prove myself. "I'm on my way, Chief. ETA 20 minutes. Negative. You're taking point on this one, Thorne. I know you're green, but you know that area better than anyone else on staff, and frankly, we're short-handed. Jenkins is dealing with that bear situation up north. Martinez is on medical leave, and Henderson called in sick." My mouth went dry. Taking point meant this was my case, my responsibility, my chance to either prove myself or fail spectacularly in front of the entire Park Service. "Chief, I appreciate the confidence, but maybe—" "Thorne." His voice carried that tone that ended discussions. "You've got the training, you've got the knowledge, and you've been hiking those trails since you were old enough to tie your own boots. Time to step up." The line went dead, leaving me alone in the pre-dawn darkness with nothing but the sound of my own shallow breathing and the distant whisper of wind through old-growth cedar. Through my cabin window, I could see the first hints of gray creeping across the sky, but dawn was still hours away. By the time I reached the Hoh River trailhead, I'd be searching in near total darkness. I grabbed my gear bag and started the mental checklist that had been drilled into me during training. Radio, GPS, medical kit, emergency flares, 3 days worth of food, water purification tablets, emergency shelter, headlamp, backup flashlight, batteries, rope, knife, and the .40 caliber service weapon I'd never had to draw outside the practice range. As I loaded everything into my truck, one thought kept circling through my mind like a vulture. "Don't screw this up, Kestrel. Someone's life depends on you not screwing this up." The drive to the Hoh River took me deeper into the park than I'd been since my first week on the job. The road twisted through stands of Sitka spruce and western hemlock so thick they blocked out what little light the overcast sky provided. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the darkness, illuminating curtains of moss that hung from branches like tattered burial shrouds. At 5:23 a.m., I pulled into the empty parking area. Dahlia's blue Honda Civic sat alone under a flickering sodium light, looking small and abandoned. I parked beside it and immediately noticed something that made my training kick in. Her windows were down, not cracked for ventilation, completely down, as if she'd left in a hurry or hadn't intended to be gone long. I pulled on my latex gloves and approached the vehicle, playing my flashlight beam across the interior. The car was clean, organized. A camera bag sat in the passenger seat, expensive looking with multiple lenses visible through the open zipper. Her purse was tucked under the driver's seat, wallet still inside, credit cards and ID intact. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. I opened my incident notebook and began documenting everything. Time of arrival, condition of vehicle, contents visible, Weather conditions. The air temperature was 38 degrees with humidity so thick I could taste it. Fog drifted between the trees like smoke, reducing visibility to maybe 20 yards in any direction. According to her camping permit, Dahlia had planned to photograph along the Hoh River Trail, specifically the Cathedral Grove section, where some of the oldest and largest trees in the park formed natural cathedrals of living wood. It was a popular spot for photographers, but also one of the most isolated sections of the trail system. I shouldered my pack and clicked on my headlamp, the LED beam cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. The trailhead marker stood like a sentinel beside the parking area. Hoh River Trail, Cathedral Grove 3.2 miles, Blue Glacier 17.5 miles, 17.5 miles to the glacier. In this terrain, that could be a 2-day hike for an experienced backpacker. For a college student with photography equipment, it would be significantly longer. But Cathedral Grove was manageable, a moderate day hike that should have brought her back well before dark. So why hadn't she returned? I started up the trail, my boots crunching on wet leaves that muffled sound and made tracking nearly impossible. The forest pressed in on both sides, a living wall of green that seemed to absorb my headlamp beam rather than reflect it. Somewhere in the canopy above, a great horned owl called out, its voice echoing off the massive tree trunks like a warning. Stay focused, I told myself. Follow protocol, search systematically, don't let the isolation get to you. But as I hiked deeper into the Olympic wilderness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in these woods, that somewhere in the darkness ahead something was waiting for me to find it, and that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the hunter in this scenario. I was the prey. The first mile of the Hoh River Trail passed without incident. My headlamp beam swept back and forth across the path, searching for any sign of Dahlia's passage. Disturbed vegetation, footprints in the soft earth, anything that might indicate which direction she'd taken. The trail here was well maintained, wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, with wooden bridges spanning the smaller creeks that fed into the main river. At 6:15 a.m., I found her first marker, a red bandana tied around a Douglas fir sapling, about chest high and clearly placed intentionally. It wasn't standard trail marking. Park policy prohibited visitors from leaving any kind of markers, but photographers sometimes used them to mark spots they wanted to return to. I photographed it with my phone, noted the GPS coordinates, and continued on. The fog was getting thicker. What had been wisps of mist when I started was now a solid wall of gray that reduced visibility to 10 feet in any direction. The beam of my headlamp seemed to hit the fog and bounce back, creating an eerie halo effect that made depth perception nearly impossible. That's when I heard the first sound that didn't belong. A whistle. 3 short bursts, then silence. I stopped dead on the trail, straining to hear over the constant drip of condensation falling from the canopy above. Emergency whistle protocol was 3 sharp blasts repeated at regular intervals. If Dahlia was out there, injured or lost, this could be her attempt to signal for help. I pulled out my own whistle and responded with 3 blasts, then waited. Nothing. I tried again, louder this time. The sound echoed off the massive tree trunks and disappeared into the fog. Still nothing. Could have been a bird, I told myself, but I knew the difference between avian calls and human signals. Someone, or something, had deliberately blown that whistle pattern. I keyed my radio. Base, this is Thorne. I'm approximately 1.2 miles up the Hoh River Trail. Found potential trail marker and heard possible emergency whistle signal, requesting confirmation on other personnel in the area. Static filled my earpiece for several seconds before Chief Morrison's voice crackled through. Negative on other personnel, Thorne. You're the only one in that sector. Could be your missing person. Proceed with caution and maintain regular check-ins. Copy, base. I resumed hiking, but now every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every sound made me freeze and listen. The whistle had come from somewhere ahead, deeper into the forest. If it was Dahlia, she was at least another mile up the trail. If it wasn't... The thought made my hand drift unconsciously to the grip of my service weapon. At the 2-mile mark, I found the second marker. Another red bandana, This one tied to a branch that hung directly over the trail. Anyone passing would have to duck under it or push it aside. But this bandana was different. It had dark stains on it that looked suspiciously like dried blood. My training kicked in. I photographed the marker from multiple angles, documented the GPS location, and carefully removed it with a stick rather than touching it directly. The stains were definitely blood, though whether human or animal would require lab analysis I wasn't qualified to perform. More concerning was what I found 10 yards past the marker. The trail split. The main Ho River Trail continued straight toward Cathedral Grove, but a smaller unmarked path branched off to the right, disappearing into a grove of old-growth cedar so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet into it. According to my map, this side trail wasn't supposed to exist. It didn't appear on any of the official park documentation, but someone had been using it recently. The undergrowth was trampled, and I could make out what looked like boot prints in the soft earth, size 8 or 9, with a distinctive tread pattern that suggested hiking boots. I had to make a choice: follow the official trail toward Cathedral Grove, or investigate the unmarked path that someone had clearly been using. If Dahlia had gotten lost and taken the wrong turn, she could be miles off course by now. But if she'd stuck to the main trail, I might be wasting precious time. I checked my watch. 6:47 a.m. Still no sign of dawn through the thick canopy, and the fog was getting worse instead of better. My radio check-in wasn't due for another hour, but I decided to call in anyway. Base, this is Thorne. Found what appears to be blood evidence and an unmarked trail branching off the main route, requesting guidance on search protocol. This time the static lasted so long I thought I'd lost signal entirely. When Morrison's voice finally came through, it was broken and distorted. Thorne, copy. Follow your judgment. Maintain check-ins. Base, you're breaking up. Please repeat. Nothing but static. I tried again, adjusting my position and checking the radio's battery level. Full charge, but still no clear signal. The dense forest and fog must be interfering with transmission. I was on my own. Follow your judgment. That's what I thought I'd heard Morrison say. My judgment told me that someone who knew the area well enough to find an unmarked trail might be exactly the kind of person who would leave red bandanas as markers. Dahlia was a photography student. She'd want to explore, to find unique angles and perspectives that other photographers might miss. I made my decision and turned onto the unmarked trail. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for one person and overgrown with ferns and devil's club that caught at my uniform and pack. The canopy was so thick here that even with my headlamp, I felt like I was walking through a tunnel. The air smelled different too, earthier, with an underlying scent of decay that made my stomach clench. 20 minutes into the side trail, I found Dahlia's camera. It was sitting on a fallen log beside the path, lens cap off, digital display still glowing faintly. The camera was expensive, a high-end DSLR that would have cost thousands of dollars. No photographer would abandon equipment like this voluntarily. I approached carefully, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of struggle. The ground around the log was disturbed, but not in a way that suggested violence. It looked more like someone had sat down, maybe to rest or change camera settings, then simply walked away. But why leave the camera behind? I picked it up, noting that the battery was nearly dead. The last photo on the memory card showed a timestamp of 2:47 p.m. the previous day, almost 16 hours ago. The image itself made my blood run cold. It was a photograph of me. Not me specifically, but someone in a park ranger uniform taken from a distance through the trees. The figure was partially obscured by branches and fog, but the distinctive green uniform and equipment were unmistakable. The timestamp indicated it had been taken yesterday afternoon, but I hadn't been in this area yesterday. I'd been on routine patrol near Lake Crescent, 20 miles away, which meant either Dahlia had photographed another ranger who hadn't reported being in this sector, or someone else was wearing a Park Service uniform. The realization hit me like ice water in my veins. I might not be the only one searching these woods. I quickly scrolled through the other recent photos on the camera. Most showed the kind of artistic nature shots you'd expect from a photography student, close-ups of moss and bark texture, long exposures of the river. compositions featuring the interplay of light and shadow through the forest canopy. But the last dozen photos were different. They showed the same locations but taken from hiding spots, behind trees, through gaps in the undergrowth, as if Dahlia had been trying to photograph something or someone without being seen. And in 3 of the photos, barely visible in the background, was that same figure in the ranger uniform. Someone had been following her, stalking her, and she'd known it. My hands were shaking as I secured the camera in my pack. This changed everything. What I'd assumed was a simple case of a lost hiker was now looking like something much worse. Dahlia hadn't gotten lost. She'd been hunted. And if someone was out here impersonating a park ranger, they'd have access to all the same equipment I did. Radio frequencies, GPS coordinates, search protocols. They'd know exactly how a real search and rescue operation would unfold. They'd know I was coming. A branch snapped somewhere behind me, sharp and loud in the dense silence of the forest. I spun around, hand instinctively moving to my weapon, but saw nothing except fog and shadow. My headlamp beam penetrated maybe 8 feet before being swallowed by the gray wall. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dahlia, is that you?" No response. I stood perfectly still, listening. The normal sounds of the forest, dripping water, distant bird calls, the whisper of wind through branches, seemed muted, as if the fog was absorbing everything. But underneath it all, I could swear I heard something else. Breathing. Slow, controlled, coming from somewhere to my left. Human breathing, but trying to be quiet. Someone was out there watching me, close enough that I could hear them but hidden by the fog and undergrowth. My radio crackled to life, startling me so badly I nearly drew my weapon. "Ranger Thorne, this is base. Please respond with your current status and location." But the voice wasn't Chief Morrison's. It was younger, smoother, with an accent I couldn't place. And more disturbing, it had used my first name. Information that wasn't broadcast on radio channels. "Who is this?" I whispered into the radio. "Ranger Thorne, you seem to be having some difficulty with your equipment. Perhaps you should consider returning to base for a radio check." The voice was calm, almost friendly, but there was something underneath it that made my skin crawl. This wasn't coming from park headquarters. Someone else had access to our radio frequency, and they knew exactly where I was. I clicked off the radio and backed away from the path, moving as quietly as possible into the deeper forest. My headlamp was a beacon advertising my location, but turning it off would leave me blind in the fog. I compromised by switching to the red filter, which would preserve my night vision while making me slightly less visible. The breathing sounds had stopped, but I had the overwhelming sensation of being watched. Somewhere in the gray maze around me, something was moving with deliberate purpose. Something that knew these woods better than I did. Something that had been planning this encounter for a long time. I needed to get back to the main trail, back to some kind of open ground where I couldn't be approached without warning. But as I tried to retrace my steps, I realized with growing horror that the narrow path I'd followed to reach this spot had vanished. Every direction looked the same. Dense forest disappearing into fog. No landmarks I recognized. No sign of the trail that had brought me here. In my focus on the camera and the disturbing photos, I'd lost track of my surroundings. I was lost in some of the most unforgiving wilderness in North America, being stalked by someone who knew I was here, carrying a radio that was compromised and possibly being used to track my movements. And somewhere in this maze of fog and forest, Dahlia Voss was either dead or wishing she was. The hunter had become the hunted, and the rules of the game had just changed completely.